All right, we're in Daniel still, and we're looking at what to do when people are sabotaging you. And you might be at your work and somebody wants your job. They think maybe they're better than you at your job, or they want to be promoted above you, or whatever. What do you do when somebody wants your job? And we're going to be talking about that because somebody wanted Daniel's job. And we're going to look at what Daniel did when somebody wanted his job. And people might want your job for a variety of reasons. And I'm just going to start with this question. Have you ever had someone not like you for something stupid? I know I've had someone not like me because I was from the north. I was going to school in the south, and they just didn't like me because I was a Yankee. Pure and simple. I know I had someone not like me once because I wore a long trench coat. And I'll just tell you, I looked pretty cool in that trench coat. And they didn't like me because I wore that trench coat. And I know I had a gal one time not like me because my name was Tim. And she was mistreated by some guy named Tim. And she put that on me. And I didn't even know that Tim. And, I was like, why don't you like me? And she told me. And it's like, what's that got to do with me? You'll find a lot of reasons why people might not like you. And some of them can be pretty stupid. But sadly, there have been times when people have not liked me, and they've been good reasons. It's because I've not been likable. And I have weaknesses that sometimes have been not very hard to find. I think we all have weaknesses, and I wish they were harder to find sometimes. And the thing about Daniel, his weaknesses were extremely hard to find. They were real hard to find. And so we want to start with, what does the Bible say? And we're in Daniel chapter 6, and here we go, all right? And it says, Darius the Mede decided to divide the kingdom into 120 provinces, and he appointed a high officer to rule over each province. The king also chose Daniel and two others as administrators to supervise the high officers and protect the king's interests. Daniel soon proved himself more capable than all the other administrators and high officers, and because of Daniel's great ability, the king made plans to place him over the entire empire. Now, here's what's interesting about Daniel. He is probably about 85 years old at this time. He's getting up in age. And we know from history that Cyrus the Great had just conquered Babylon in about 539 BC. And so this is somewhere right about that time. And so this is a whole new administration. And so who is Darius the Mede? Now I want you to get this. Most historians believe that Darius the Mede is the same guy as Cyrus the Persian, or Cyrus the Great. And it's just, if you're talking about the Medes, he went by Darius. And if you're talking about the Persians, he went by Cyrus. So it's the same guy. And so when Daniel is writing here, he's calling him Darius, but it's the same guy as Cyrus. And I want you to remember that, because I'm going to bring this up at the end. All right? So I want you to remember that, okay? And so Daniel's about 85 years old, all right? Now, King Darius planned to place Daniel as the number 2 guy over the kingdom, just under him. Now let's go on. Verse 4 says, Then the other administrators and high officers began searching for some fault in the way Daniel was handling government affairs. But they couldn't find anything to criticize or condemn. He was faithful, always responsible, and completely trustworthy. So they concluded our only chance of finding grounds for accusing Daniel will be in connection with the rules of his religion. And so here's our point. People who can't get you on character will come after your faith. When they can't get you on your character, they will come after your faith. So let's go to this question. How would you define character? So what does the Bible say? Verse 6 says, "So the administrators and high officers went to the king and said, 'Long live King Darius.' We are all in agreement. We administrators, officials, high officers, advisors, and governors, that the king should make a law that will be strictly enforced. Give orders that for the next 30 days, any person," now I want you to get this. This is important. I'm going to say something in a minute that might surprise you. Give orders that for the next 30 days, that's what I want you to remember. 30 days, any person who prays to anyone divine or human, except to you, your majesty, will be thrown into the den of lions. And now, your majesty, issue and sign this law so it cannot be changed. An official law of the Medes and Persians. And again, you see where we say this is the Medes and the Persians came together, Darius the Medes and Cyrus the Persians, and that's why it's one guy and under two different names. He had two different names that cannot be revoked. So King Darius signed the law. Now you know he's got to have a little bit there that he wants people to pray to him. You know, he's got a little thing there that, you know, a little arrogance to him, that he's going to allow people to pray to him for 30 days, right? But when Daniel learned that the law had been signed, now again, I want you to read that. This was no surprise. He learned that the law had been signed. He went home and he knelt down as usual. This was nothing new. He did this as usual in his upstairs room with its windows open. I want you to get that. The windows are open towards Jerusalem. He prayed 3 times a day. So he did this 3 times a day, just as he always done, giving thanks to his God. So he opens the windows, praying towards Jerusalem. He's on his 2nd floor. They're obviously in another building on a 2nd floor, and they can see him. Now, they probably got their Kodak camera, and they hit the picture, and you know how that cameras work, right? And they take it to the king, right? And so the order was for 30 days. And we know Daniel knew about it, and he didn't change his routine. Now, I'm going to tell you, Daniel, I don't know why he didn't change his routine. Now, I'm going to tell you, he shouldn't stop praying. He should have kept praying. Well, why didn't he shut the windows? Right? Why didn't he shut the windows? It made no sense to keep the windows open. You know, the Bible tells us in the New Testament we're supposed to go in a closet to pray. There was no special thing keeping those windows open. It didn't make his prayers any better, right? He knew the law was in effect. He had to know it was only for 30 days, right? And so keeping the windows open, he had to know that there was a reason why this 30-day thing was going on. Because there's a verse in the New Testament that Jesus said. Matthew 10:16 said, Jesus said, look, I'm sending you out as sheep among wolves. I'm sending you out as sheep among wolves. There's bad people out there. There's bad people out there. Wolves want to get the sheep. They're wanting to take you down. So you need to be as shrewd as snakes and harmless as doves. So you need to think out there. So for 30 days, just shut your windows. Keep praying, but shut the windows. Doesn't that make sense? They're out there to get you for 30 days. There's a law out there that they're trying to catch you. Just shut the windows. They can't see you. They can't take their pictures. Please don't send me any emails that they didn't have cameras back then, because I kind of know that. I'm hoping you know that. Please don't make it easy for the enemy to attack you. That's all we're saying. Don't make it easy for the enemy to attack you. We know they want to attack you. Don't make it easy, all right? And as we go to this question, in what situation should we do what is right and leave the consequences to God? There are going to be people, as you're talking about this in your hotspots, or if you're watching this in your home with your spouse or your children, there's going to be people say, he should have just kept doing this. And I'm just going to say, why should he kept the windows open during those 30 days? There are times we should do what's right. He should have kept praying. But when are there times we should do what we should do and leave the consequences to God? So discuss that in your groups. All right, what does the Bible say? So what happens here? So these guys, obviously, they get them. And they go and they go to the king. And they told the king, that man Daniel, one of the captives from Judah, is ignoring you and your law. He still prays to his God 3 times a day. Hearing this, the king was deeply troubled. Now remember, the king is going to make him the number 2 guy. The king really liked Daniel. And he's deeply troubled, and he tried to think of a way to save Daniel. I love that verse. He tried to figure out a loophole to save Daniel. And he spent the rest of the day looking for a way to get Daniel out of this predicament. And he's really trying to help Daniel. And so Daniel was such a man, the king did not want to fulfill these orders. And so there's nothing he can do. And so he ends up putting Daniel into the lion's den, and he can't sleep at night. He's a wreck. He can't sleep, and there's nothing he can do. And so they throw Daniel into the lion's den. And so very early the next morning, the king got up and he hurried out to the lion's den. And when he got there, he called out in anguish, and he said, Daniel, servant of the living God, was your God whom you serve so faithfully able to rescue you from the lions? And Daniel answered, long live the king. My God sent his angel to shut the lions' mouths so that they would not hurt me, for I have been found innocent in his sight, and I have not wronged you, your majesty. And so the king is happy that Daniel is alive. I mean, he is tickled. And so here's what I want you to get. Daniel shows honor to the king. He says, long live the king. And he shows no ill will to the king. I would have been a little upset that you threw me in the lion's den. He's not mad at all. He's not mad at all. And so here's what goes on afterwards. The king was overjoyed and ordered Daniel to be lifted from the den. Not a scratch was found on him. And here it says, for he had trusted in his God. For he had trusted in his God. Then the king gave orders to arrest the men who had maliciously accused Daniel. This reminds me of Pilate. Because Daniel, or the king, knew that these guys were trying to get Daniel in trouble because they wanted his job. Pilate knew that the Pharisees had nothing on Jesus. They knew that Jesus had done nothing wrong. And it kind of reminds me. And so the king gave orders to arrest the men who had maliciously accused Daniel. He had them thrown into the lion's den. And here, get this, along with their wives and children. The lions leaped on them and tore them apart before they even hit the floor of the den. And so what we see here, the accusers, their wives, and their children are thrown into the lion's den and are devoured. And so what we see is Daniel was not spared because the lions were not hungry. He was spared because of God's protection. Because as soon as these other ones were thrown in, the lions jumped on them. And so how can we obey? What do we learn from this? What do we learn from this? We need to trust God completely and leave the consequences to Him. We talked about this last week with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that Daniel could have been killed and it still would have been a lesson for us. Because history is filled with men and women who died for the faith. And yet God spared Daniel, but He might not have, and it still would have been something for us to learn. We need to be people of moral character because it took they couldn't find no fault with Daniel. We need to, when we're at work, we need to not lie. We don't steal. We need to be honest. We don't gossip. We need to be people that all the other people go, if we're going to get them, we got to get them on their faith. We're not going to get them on their morality. They're honest people. They're people of character. Also, we need to be people of prayer. If we ever make a rule in America that we got to pray to the president, shut the windows, okay? But still pray. We need to pray, all right? Pray. We need to talk to God daily and often each day. And here's the last point I want you to remember. This is the thing I want you to remember when people are trying to get your job, when people are trying to sabotage you, when you got somebody sitting right across from you, you know that anytime you do something or you might have made a mistake, they run in and tell the boss, and they're trying to get you to, every time you make a mistake, because mistakes happen, and they run in and tell somebody about every mistake you make. I want you to remember this. Daniel did nothing different to the people trying to hurt him. He didn't have a plan. He didn't go and tell the king anything bad on them. He just did his job. It was the king that threw them into the lion's den. He never did anything in retaliation to them. It was the king. And so if you got somebody tattling on you all the time, always finding your faults, don't be the person back to them, telling their faults back to your boss. Don't be that person. You just let your character speak for itself. Does that make sense? And then here's what happened. And I want you to, as we're wrapping up Daniel, Daniel 6, verse 25 and 26 said this: Then King Darius sent this message to the people of every race and nation and language throughout the world. Peace and prosperity to you. I decree that everyone throughout my kingdom should tremble with fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, and he will endure forever. Daniel served the Lord faithfully. There was no national repentance as far as we can tell through history because of Daniel. He served through a bunch of different regimes, different kings, different people was in charge. He didn't see repentance like in Babylon, like Jonah did. Basically, we see two kings came to know the Lord, know God through Daniel's faithful service. But what's interesting is this King Darius, as I said, was the same guy as King Cyrus. And he is mentioned by name by Isaiah in chapter 45 of Isaiah, verses 1 through 3, 150 years earlier in a prophecy. Isn't it incredible how God works? God used this man and called him out 150 years earlier. And that's how we know that the Bible is written by God. kind of cool. That's why I believe it. That's why I live my life by it. And I hope you do too. Think about that this week as we strive to become more like Christ, as we study the Bible, serve others, and share our faith.